Dodging a punch is something almost everyone has wished they could do. The idea of reacting in just a few milliseconds to avoid disaster sounds pretty amazing. But what if I told you it's actually a skill that anyone can develop? In this video, we'll explore the science of dodging a hit. Just don't blame me if you can't pull it off. Let's start with the basics: reflexes. These aren't only the simple, primitive ones like pulling your hand away from a hot stove or the classic knee-jerk test at the doctor's office. Reflexes can also be much more complex, triggering entire muscle sequences without you consciously deciding to move. We're born with them, but they can also be sharpened through practice. The reflex behind dodging a punch involves a far more advanced level of sensory integration, combining vision, spatial prediction, and muscle coordination in fractions of a second. When someone throws a strike at you, it all begins with your eyes. Specialized motion-sensitive cells in the retina pick up movement, not by focusing on details, but by detecting rapid changes in your surroundings. They send that data through the optic nerve to the brain's visual cortex. In under 120 milliseconds, your brain already knows that something is moving. To put that in perspective, just reading the word milliseconds takes you around 400. But here's where it gets more interesting: your brain doesn't only react, it predicts. Neurons in the parietal lobe can anticipate trajectories. This means that while the punch is still on its way, your brain is already making a hypothesis about where it's going and how fast it will arrive. This predictive mechanism is why skilled fighters often seem to move before the punch even fully develops. They're not reacting to the strike itself, they're reading intention, almost like having a sixth sense. At the same time, the amygdala lights up. Not necessarily out of fear, but as an internal alarm system assessing the threat. That signal is relayed to the motor cortex and deep brain structures like the cerebellum, which fine-tune the muscular response. At this point, you haven't made a conscious choice, but your body is already gearing up to move. That's pretty wild if you think about it. From the motor cortex, the command travels to the muscles that make dodging possible: neck, shoulders, torso, and arms. From spotting the movement to executing the dodge usually takes between 250 and 300 milliseconds. But elite athletes can cut that time down to under 150. That speed isn't magic. It comes from repeated training that strengthens the connection between sensory and motor areas, especially through the cerebellum. In simple terms, they've reinforced the wires that link vision to movement, making them twice as fast when it counts. And here's something most people don't know: not every motor response even passes through the brain. In extreme situations, the body can trigger what's called a spinal reflex. The signal goes straight from the spinal cord to the muscle, skipping the brain entirely. It's an evolutionary shortcut, favoring speed over accuracy in moments where every fraction of a second matters. Another interesting fact: the best dodgers aren't necessarily the strongest. Research in sports like boxing and judo shows that faster reaction times are more closely linked to sensoromotor coordination than muscle size. In other words, dodging well is less about raw strength and more about fine-tuned neural connections. So how can you actually improve your reflexes? By training three main things. First, visual perception. Tracking balls moving in different directions, using light reaction boards, or even practicing with your peripheral vision can sharpen your ability to pick up sudden movements. Second, neuromuscular coordination. Practicing simple dodges in front of a mirror, working with a partner throwing light punches, or even reacting to swinging ropes forces you to integrate vision, decision-making, and movement together. Third, reaction time itself. Reflex apps, games with sudden audio cues, or unexpected visual signals all help tighten the circuit between eyes, brain, and muscles. You don't become faster by magic, you just cut down the steps between seeing, processing, and moving. Of course, there are things that can throw you off: fatigue, alcohol, chronic stress, and even overthinking. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for rational thought, sometimes gets in the way instead of helping. Hesitate for a second, and it's already too late. At the end of the day, the best way to dodge a punch is to not be where it lands in the first place. But if you can't avoid it, at least make sure your brain is rested and your body ready. Nature already gave you the system, you just have to train it. See you next time.